I'm Keith Johnston.
And I'm James McQuivey.
Your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Vice President and Principal Analyst JP Gounder and Senior Analyst Jonathan Roberts to help us answer a very timely question. Is AI adding to or alleviating employee burnout? Welcome both.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
Glad to be here too.
Gentlemen, this is more likely a bit more complex of an answer than it is a question. But just to get us started, you have some really interesting benchmarking data, Jonathan, that actually kind of frames whether the employee burnout is as bad as we may think it is in enterprises today. Can you just talk about some of that data?
Absolutely. So here's the short answer. It's bad. We do have some kind of urgent and compelling data that would suggest that burnout is still a top concern and a top problem kind of amongst the global workforce. Right now, we're looking at just about half of the global workforce being somewhere in that burnout spectrum. But before we can have a conversation about burnout, we have to kind of level set on what it actually means, what that even is, if we're going to talk about how AI kind of impacts burnout. So very, very quickly, Forrester's point of view on the inputs to burnout as it pertains to how burnout is experienced by and within work. We all know that work and life is just this big hodge right now. But as far as work is concerned, we see burnout, people entering the burnout spectrum right at the intersection of an imbalance between expectations, resources, and the perceptions of that relationship, right? So we say balance, good, as from an EX perspective, imbalance, bad, right? So if we're looking at it from that lens and through that model, we have about half of the global workforce somewhere on the burnout spectrum. And furthermore, we're analysts, so we love a 2x2. We put engagement and burnout on a 2x2. And we have categorized this segment of the workforce that is high burnout and low engagement. We call them kind of red zone workers, as folks in that space really are experiencing kind of a crisis experience. And that's about 19% of the global workforce. So yeah, it's absolutely a challenge right now.
So that's pretty striking. JP, maybe put some color into what are the real issues that are increasing burnout in the workplace?
Well, I think Jonathan laid out this elegant way of thinking about it around expectations, resources. We also need to talk about job security, right? This is a perennial. And those of us who've been in business for many, many years, many business cycles, we see what's happening right now. It's an odd market where we have actually a seemingly low unemployment rate. And yet we all know people who are losing their jobs, particularly in white collar areas. At the same time, there are actually shortages in some frontline areas. So it's a very odd kind of job market. So that adds a layer of stress on top of the experiences that people are having inside of their organizations. And of course, the world is also changing faster than ever before.
But actually, you're raising an interesting question, JP, because if that job security is an issue that contributes to burnout, and maybe for the last 20 years, we've been talking about AI or, these machine learning models or tools are actually going to threaten job security directly, right? That was the message that most everyone was talking about. It feels like over the last couple of years, we've been able to say, you know what, actually, AI is not going to replace you. Robots are not going to replace you. AI is going to make your job easier. And that sets us up here today because in theory, AI is going to do all the boring parts of your job. It's going to do all the routine, rote tasks and leave you with all the human and creative parts too. And so I'd love to hear whether you think that's true. Are we suddenly going to say burnout's over? Is Jonathan going to be able to finally put all that burnout coverage to rest? And then we don't even have to talk about this anymore.
Yeah, I wish I could take burnout out of Jonathan's research agenda because it's all solved. But unfortunately, that's unlikely to happen. A couple things. One, we know that when we ask people if they fear losing their job to automation or AI in the next 10 years, 59% of people say within the next 10 years, they fear for their own job. But when we ask them, do you think that other people will lose their job in the next 10 years? The number rises to 86%. So clearly, job loss remains an issue. And in the popular discourse, you see a lot of coverage about this. Ultimately, the idea of AI as a remedy for burnout is that decision makers are going to take this really employee experience centric approach. They're going to use AI to, as James mentioned, take the boring, the rote, repetitive things off of people's plates and make their lives happier and more effective, lowering the friction of what my day to day feels like.
I mean, that sounds really good to me, I got to say.
It does. It sounds great, and it does work in little pockets, but the record at this point is rather thin on AI taking over those tasks in a way that increases our happiness. We simply don't have enough examples. There could be real pockets of it where you say, wow, Betsy Summers and I, another colleague, we released a report about HR pros, and HR pros are using generative AI in that back and forth with hiring managers to write a job description. They can take a whole bunch of data about a job and have assistance from generative AI. So that's cool, but that's not going to change your entire life. I think the biggest issue or the bigger issue is AI as a cause of burnout, not as a remedy.
And I think it's going to be important to point out here, though, that, it's a dynamic economy. AI is going to impact different industries and different jobs in different ways. And it's not going to all happen at once. So, I want to be careful that we don't get too scared. Nobody's going to be writing your reports for you anytime soon. But I guess, in essence, we do have to ask the big question. And I guess this is for you, Jonathan. Is AI really a cause for burnout? And how is it, if that's the case?
I mean, it's a good question to wrestle with. And all signs kind of lead to, at this point, where we are in AI with understanding, as JP would call it, our AIQ, our leaning into or rejecting the idea of AI. It's more a cause right now, to be quite frank with you. And if you look at the model that I presented earlier, it makes a lot of sense. If we look at both the expectations of what folks are bringing to the conversation, what they think is going to change about their jobs, what this means about what good looks like, how much or how little they should lean into kind of wrestling with this new technology in a way that meaningfully changes their jobs. If you look at resources, right, if people have the right skills, the right understanding, the right levels of energy, quite frankly, to tackle an entirely new way to think about their work and their place within the organization. And then when you look at perceptions, right, and how people perceive this big monumental change affecting their job, all you see is imbalance. That's all there is. We haven't kind of regulated or normalized this as a space yet. So right now, it's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of question. It's a lot of, during CX Summit, which was here in Nashville a few weeks ago, I did a session on AI and I had folks build a word cloud for me in real time. It was not good. The words that were coming up were about uncertainty and inauthenticity and misunderstanding and opportunity and exposure and risk. And so largely folks are trying to grapple with this as a space, but it is causing a whole lot of anxiety, fear, and concern.
Now, I know, JP, that you've been related to this. You've been talking to a lot of clients who are adopting things like Microsoft Copilot as part of their 365 relationship. I'm just curious, are people seeing in that adoption process, are they seeing the kinds of things that Jonathan is hearing from these other folks about their uptake of these, supposedly miraculous tools?
Yeah, the picture is mixed. And the way I would put it is there's something of a bell curve at work here. I mean, clearly there are early adopter employees in every organization who are excited to get these tools and who make use of them very easily. And we know that this will happen because there's a lot of bring your own AI behavior, people going and using public chat GPT. There are certain folks who, by inclination, psychological profile, or skill set, are ready to go. But the problem is that when we look across the entirety of your workforce, there are other folks who are not in that spot. And Our AIQ model helps us to see, are you sort of in a high readiness, medium readiness, or low readiness? And more than half of global employees that we've surveyed are in the lower two, either they're medium or low. So, if you're going to roll out some of these tools internally, you're going to find initial success. You're going to find that there will be people who are early adopters who have the skills and inclinations to succeed. But if you're trying to go a little bit further out, and there are companies that say, we want everyone to get the benefits of generative AI today, the reality is most leaders I talk to are underprepared in terms of training by an order of magnitude, right? They're like, oh yeah, we're giving an hour of training. The skills that are needed are vastly exceed an hour of training. And of course, there are pockets of pressure. The leaders who are tasked with, hey, we want an AI strategy, we want generative AI to create value this quarter, those folks are certainly feeling pressure. So it's a balanced picture. There are definitely some successes, but there's also a lot of work to be done to make sure people are not burned out.
I'd like to add really quickly that it's also important that we take a look at the context on when this is happening, right? So there's a backdrop across, the global workforce where there's kind of a low energy, there's some low engagement going on, there's a lot of concern about the economy, about where jobs are going, and the resources that it takes to lean into, to be curious about, to offer goodwill to big technological changes and big behavioral changes, it costs something. There's a certain level of energy and engagement that is kind of required for workforces to be able to lean into big changes like this, right? And so there's a timing thing that we are trying to enter the AI revolution at a time where folks simply don't have a whole lot of space and capacity and goodwill and energy to tackle, right? So that's another part of this that I think is of note.
And it can feel kind of awkward, can't it, when all of a sudden the company says, hey, we've got this new tool for you. It's going to solve all of your problems and it's going to do everything that you don't want to do. When they're sitting there saying, but have you given me the resources to be successful even before the AI question came up, right?
Right. Do you even know what it will take for me to be successful, quite frankly? Right. So, yes.
Yeah, AI isn't going to be the panacea that's going to smooth over all the other problems if you have them in your workforce. If you're not being human centric to begin with, then AI actually could be alienating in certain circumstances. Something we need to think about over time is that some jobs will be reshaped by AI in much more specific ways than what we have today. It is one thing to use a horizontal tool like ChatGPT Enterprise or Microsoft Copilot, which we sort of say, okay, that's going to help anybody with writing or emailing or summarizing meetings. That's a horizontal tool that applies to every worker. But the future lies in a much more specific, you could think of it as the vertical of this, which is I'm going to go deep into a specific job. I'm in internal sales, inside sales, and I want to be able to, crank out more communications to a very specific slice of customers. And it's going to be combining generative tools with other kinds of things like predictive analytics to help me be more successful. Or I am working in, let's say I'm a physician, right? Physicians need really specialized tools that are going to be able to say, okay, I'm going to use a multimodal generative AI model that takes into account all of the imaging that has been done on this patient, the patient's record, the medical literature that is relevant here, and an echocardiogram. And it's going to look at all of that and be able to say, here's an initial assessment, doctor. Here are some things to look out for. And that may save them time and effort. But it takes a lot more time to reshape an entire job than it does to roll out these general tools.
So you're pointing out a lot of variability in different jobs, JP, but you're giving really good positive examples too. So I think we got to face this certain inevitability that it's not going to happen overnight, but certain jobs are going away. They're going to be augmented. They're going to be created. In the meantime, are there some resources or tools that we can suggest that can lower the stress and increase the curiosity right now while we're going through this transition so we don't burn out?
So that's a great question, Keith. What I first think about when trying to figure out how we can do this better is actually looking back to change theory, right? So even beyond AI, we know our research would suggest that there are ways in which to present change. And let's face it, right? AI is probably the biggest technological and behavioral change that we're going to be presenting to our workforces in the next decade, right? So how to present it like change and how to do change well. Katie Tynan is another analyst on the Future of Work team, and she has some brilliant kind of insights in and around how to do change well. And she talks through things like resolving uncertainty, identifying barriers, right? Listening and responding, releasing resources. So JP says, an hour of training. All right, you get it? No, it's about understanding what resources it'll take to really get people to lean into something like this, right? So thinking about AI as a change, and then think about ways to do change well to increase the likelihood that humans lean into as opposed to reject big kind of behavioral and process and technological changes.
I like that you're saying it that way because you're making it very, very clear that this isn't just about whether or not the people choose to show up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to do AI, that the organization has an obligation to make it easy for them to make that choice, to make it clear to them that there's a reason to make that choice. This is a two-way street. We can't just say, the really future-oriented people, we only want those kinds of employees. It's everyone else's fault if they don't show up ready to be successful with AI. Your reference of Katie's work in leading and managing change is really all about communication. You have to say it over and over again. This is why we are doing this. This is the vision we have for why this is going to occur. And I think that's important because there's a certain listener in our audience, perhaps, who is hearing maybe only part of what we're saying and hearing like, yeah, I only want the smartest, most AI-ready employees. And when we say things like AIQ, JP, they hear, yeah, I only want people with a high AIQ. They don't realize their role as leaders to develop the AIQ of the workforce.
Yeah. So, people signed up to be great marketers or great physicians or great finance, people or great HR leaders. They didn't sign up to be Gen AI people, right? So this is a big change that is reshaping the way they do their jobs, but it's not what they signed up for. So to expect someone who's a great marketer to immediately be great also in generative AI is a bit unrealistic. And you may also lose some of your best talent if you hire only on AI as a vector. So a couple things that come to mind. Obviously, we've mentioned AIQ as a starting point. You can run our survey. You can benchmark where everybody is. It'll help you prioritize areas to train and encourage. But there's another practice I'd like to talk about as well, and that is the power of peer-to-peer learning and curating and hosting peer-to-peer learning. The best companies at generating results from generative AI are those who are creating venues, they're creating Teams channels and Slack channels. They are running around and looking at early adopters who have success stories inside their own companies, and they're doing little videos, testimonials, if you will, 5 minutes or less. Hey, Anne in accounting, or hey, John in marketing, how are you using this tool and succeeding? People learn more and they trust more when they hear the message from people in their own company who have been successful than all of the vendor-driven, training sessions that are on demand that you can imagine. So I very strongly recommend that leaders listening to this think about how you can connect the people in your own company as you roll this out from the early adopters to everyone else.
So we've raised some great points here. We started out just saying how troubling it is that, burnout, maybe in part be driven by AI, is just at an astronomical rate. But we also just have to acknowledge that this AI train is it's going to keep moving, right? So maybe we can just touch on a couple of industries or functions that leaders right now need to be on high alert that burnout's really a thing, and that they need to immediately engage in some of your practices around AIQ or some of these other resources that we're suggesting. What are those industries specifically where we can help our clients right now?
So I'll go ahead and say, we know we've done some research, and I don't think it's any mystery that the healthcare sector is probably one of the most burned out areas from the pandemic. They've also had a vast amount of attrition, people leaving the industry entirely. And of course, AI is not a panacea, but there are things we can do. If you can help to compress the time from running some tests to getting an initial diagnosis, that can be very, very powerful. So, healthcare leaders are very involved in trying to build systems using AI that will do this in an effective way. You must retain human in the loop. You need the human doctor in the loop, but that doctor can get a whole lot of help from an AI infused application that has a generative interface. Another area that we see, cybersecurity, right? This is an area where human talent can never scale to the size of the threat. You could have all the people you want in a room, NASA style, sitting there waiting, typing, figuring out, what threats are coming in. The internet moves much faster. Automated attacks move much faster. So you've got to bring AI into the security realm in all the wise ways, all the well-planned ways. There's always going to be humans who have oversight and are looking at this, but the system moves too fast to leave it to humans alone.
I want to bring this up because, Jonathan, I believe you've been doing a lot of work in the government sector, the public sector. Is burnout high over there? What are you seeing?
Burnout is notably and extremely high, and probably for some different reasons, right? We talk a lot about the inputs that we see in different industries leading to burnout. And a lot of burnout in the kind of public government sector is around expectations and resources, as you can imagine, right? That being out of balance. And so to what degree AI can help with the resource part of this, with folks being able to actually do their jobs and do their jobs better, faster, cheaper, more accurately, that will absolutely help with balance, right? So we'd have to figure that out in the near term. But we also need to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is also equitable and that won't, put us back with some of our other initiatives that we're thinking about that we've been working on for years, right? So that's another part of this, that in our haste to get to good quickly, that we still do this responsibly, right? So there's a whole other side of the AI conversation around ethics and doing this in a way that increases fairness and inclusion as well.
Great stuff. So it's predictions season. We just now started to kick it off, James. You, of course, lead the future of work predictions. I guess I can ask you, and maybe these guys can answer, is there a particular question you may be just kind of throwing out there that may be specific to burnout this year come predictions?
Well, our last year's predictions, one of the things we predicted for 2024 was what we call the EX winter, which is a kind of a pulling back, not a cutting of budgets, but a reallocation of spend in the HR side of the house to be more focused on the efficiencies of employee experience rather than the effectiveness of employee experience. So that EX winter is part of all of this. I mean, one of the reasons Jonathan is so busy talking to people about burnout these days is that their companies have pulled back a little bit. Not that they're suddenly turning their backs on their employees, but they're just, you feel it when the organization seems to forget that there's people in all of these roles. So as I think about a prediction for 2025, one of the first things I'm going to ask our team when we have our big brainstorm here very shortly is the EX winter over, or is it just going to get chillier in 2025? And AI might be a help or a hindrance to that.
So let's ask the question then, specific to burnout, because that's where we started. And we had a really good question, which is, if you were to look 1 year or even 5 years out, will we be looking back at AI as that tool that eliminated this burnout crisis, or the tool that truly sends workers over the edge because of all the things that we talked about?
I think it's a great question. In 1 year, we're going to find that there will be pockets of employees who benefit and lower their burnout, but that will be less than 10% of the overall worker population in my prediction. The rest of the people will be on a bit of a bell curve. Some of them will be stressed about it. Some of them will experience the growing pains because their job is changing, or maybe they, in a few cases, lose their jobs. So in a year, I think it's going to be challenging. I think in 5 years, it'll be a similar picture, but with lots more happy parts to the story. Maybe half of employees will see some diminishment in the stressors associated with their jobs because they have tools that can help them more effective. That's going to include things like agents. So AI agents are on the rise and they're taking on an additional set of tasks. But the other half are still going to be losing and still going to be in transition. It's a decade-long overall journey.
Yeah, I can definitely follow up on that. It's a great question. My answer is yes. I think for some people, for the people and the employees that have experienced this change happening well, have experienced ways in which AI has helped them create balance amongst the tasks of their jobs, has helped solidify expectations, and ease negative perceptions around AI. For those folks, I do believe that it will help create balance. All right, and we just talked about the relationship to balance and burnout. For other folks, I do believe that AI, the resistance to AI, the way that AI will be rolled out poorly, from its communication to its training to its lingering fears and concerns, will actually create more imbalance, right? As we continue to move the goalposts, as we're unclear about what good looks like in terms of how we enact this technology and how we use it to be better at our jobs. So truly, I do think that depending on who you are, depending on the organization's both individual, group, and kind of enterprise level AIQ, but also how AI is experienced, I believe that it is going to either very, very acutely create balance or exacerbate imbalance in organizations. So yes, both. So it's really up to organizations and folks listening to this to make sure we handle this with the right level of care and concern from a change management perspective so that we can kind of wait in the long term.
James, I want to first thank you for being a co-host, but I feel like it would be a missed opportunity to ask you if you don't have a point of view.
Well, I will say these are two very smart people on both of these topics, so I trust them. I think from my perspective, what I worry about is that individual leader in the organization who, we're talking about the organization as a whole and we're talking about the individual worker, but wedged in between there is that middle manager, that frontline manager maybe, who is expected to carry this AI revolution to their workers, but they're not experts in it. They're just doing what they're told. They're being promised that this training is effective. And so if I think about whose stresses are going to be worse 5 years from now, who's going to have burned out more 5 years from now, I actually think it's the managers. I think we're going to forget to address them. I hope we address the people at the end of the row, the individual workers and individual contributors. I hope we're focused on them. But I think in the process, we might just miss the burnout that we're creating for the people in the middle.
So good. I don't know if any of us have elevated the mood, but this is a very important conversation. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you, JP, for joining us in this podcast. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for the invite, as always.
If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Forrester's What It Means podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. To continue the conversation, follow Forrester on LinkedIn or drop us a note at podcast@forrester.com. Thanks for listening.